Today is National Sorry Day, where we remember and acknowledge the mistreatment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who were forcibly removed as children from their families and communities, otherwise known as the stolen generations. Children were taken because of laws and government policies at the time which aimed to assimilate the Indigenous population into the non-Indigenous community. The children were renamed, forced to stop speaking their native language, and were told their parents no longer wanted them. The policies were in place into the 1970s, and many First Nations people are still searching for lost parents and siblings today. The first National Sorry Day was held 25 years ago, commemorating 1 year after the Bringing Them Home report was tabled in federal parliament. That report found that the forced removal of Indigenous children had caused lifelong impacts on stolen generation survivors and families.
What we're doing today, what the nation is doing today, well, most of the nation is doing today, is acknowledging and giving validity to the experiences of many Australians, many Indigenous Australians.
10 years later, in February 2008, then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd made a formal apology on the floor of Parliament.
Today we honour the Indigenous peoples of this land, the oldest continuing cultures in human history. We reflect on their past mistreatment. We reflect in particular on the mistreatment of those who were stolen generations, this blemished chapter in our national history. The time has now come for the nation to turn a new page in Australia's history by righting the wrongs of the past and so moving forward with confidence to the future. We apologise for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering and loss on these, our fellow Australians.
And now, as the national conversation centres on the voice to Parliament, Sorry Day is taking on a particular significance. Referendum correspondent Dan Borscher joins me now in the studio. Dan, of course, as we just heard there, the 25th anniversary of Sorry Day, many Indigenous Australians say they're still being asked, why should I apologise? What do you say to that?
Well, it's pretty intense to grapple with, isn't it? That after all these years, that's part of the conversation, that we're still talking about why that apology was made and why this happened. And of course that goes back to the Bringing Them Home report that looked back at that history, that really dark part of our Australian history of where children were forcibly removed in a term that was written about much at the time to smooth the dying pillow, to breed Aboriginality out of Australians at that point. And I think that what's so challenging now is that if people are still grappling with that question, it means that there's much more conversation that needs to be had. The Healing Foundation was established out of that Bring Them Home report, and it really has done so much work in those years since around intergenerational trauma and digging into and deeply understanding the way that options for your life ahead are diminished if that trauma isn't dealt with. So today we're reflecting upon that report and that anniversary, and I guess the counter to the question of why saying sorry is the why not. Why shouldn't we be saying sorry, or why shouldn't we be certainly acknowledging what has happened in the past and how that frames the contemporary experience of so many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today?
And Dan, it's another anniversary today, 6 years since the landmark gathering at Uluṟu, leaders gathering there in the Red Centre for the Uluṟu Dialogue. What's been happening there today? Yeah,
so they've really been meeting today to commemorate and to think towards the future. So, of course, we know that there is going to be a referendum later this year. That, of course, has been central to the conversations that are happening there. But I want to reflect for a moment on the statement that came out, the Uluṟu Statement from the Heart that called for voice, treaty, truth. And there was one passage in there that I wanted to quote, that, quote, proportionally, we're the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them, and our youth language in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. And that really reflects on what we were just discussing with Sorry Day, and of course, which really kicks off tomorrow's National Reconciliation Week, about the theme of being a voice for generations. But it also goes to the structural issues that the architects of the Uluṟu statement say will be dealt with through a voice to Parliament as the first mechanism, the voice, then the treaty, and the truth. But of course, this is a bigger political conversation, and one, Gemma, we've seen highlighted this week with the speeches in Parliament, the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, saying that there is a great risk that a successful referendum and a voice to Parliament would re-racialise Australia. That was shot down by others in his party, and the Prime Minister was very strong in calling that out. Linda Burney, the Minister for Indigenous Australians, said that what she had heard in that speech from Peter Dutton was the greatest misinformation and disinformation. Linda Burney is at Uluṟu on Anangal country. Here's a little of what she had to say this morning.
Thousands and thousands of ordinary Australians that believe that this is the right thing to do, that the time has come for the Uluṟu statement. And when we looked at what the Prime Minister said in the Parliament yesterday, imagine if you're on the other side of the gap. Imagine if your life expectancy was 9 years shorter. Imagine if you had more chance of going to jail than to university. Put yourself in the shoes of First Nations people.
Dan, you've been working on a very special series of 1+1. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, this has been one of the great joys in what has been, I think it's fair to say, a very tense conversation that we're having nationally. We've seen that right here at the ABC around the treatment of our colleague Stan Grant for speaking on a very program in these studios. This program of 1+1 is doing something that is really central to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, that is capturing and sharing stories. And I've been really fortunate to sit down on country around the nation with elders to talk about their experience, their perspectives, their views on the world. Ian Ham, a Yorta Yorta elder here at Yarrawonga, talked to me about his experience of being a member of the stolen generation and how that cut away from him opportunities to connect with family. June Oscar here, welcoming me to her country on Bunuba land up near Fitzroy Crossing in Western Australia. We get a great sense through this series, Gemma, of the wisdom, the perspective of these elders, but also their views on some of the contemporary political matters we're discussing. We have a wide range of views around the voice, which of course is reflected across the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, as it is the broader Australian community. We've got a little clip here of June Oscar, who's a Bunuba elder and also the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner. Let's have a listen to that. June, I know that you care for a grandchild and a great-grandchild as well through kinship caring. How important is it for them to have a strong grounding in ancestral, those ancient stories, some of which you've shared with me today?
Oh, it's absolutely important. I have a huge responsibility to ensure my great-granddaughter knows who she is, hears her language. It's so important because the country needs us to remain connected, because the country speaks through us, through the people who belong to it. Nganda moy ngirango bono bayano mound karwangande lulura moy nenge panda nenge jalongoro karwangande.
You know, it just fills my heart with joy to hear Bunuba elder June Oscar there speaking her language and reminding us about that inalienable connection to country, to kin, to land, and those stories that connect all of those together. And I just want to say, Gemma, I'm so grateful for the whole team that's been behind this, Stephanie Bolchi in particular, for working tirelessly, and of course the elders who have generously welcomed us to their land to share their stories with me, but through me, the entire nation. That'll be airing out from next Thursday night. And yeah, thanks so much for giving me some time to have a yarn about it today.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to see it, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you.